You're a man standing in the kitchen at 11 p.m., holding a glass of water you don't remember pouring. The house is quiet, everyone's asleep, and you're not tired, which is strange, because you've been exhausted every other night for the past 6 months. But tonight your brain is somewhere else entirely, not running through tomorrow's meeting, not cataloging the unfinished things. It's moving through something older, a version of your life you almost chose, a road that closed quietly, without ceremony. A feeling you can't quite name but recognize immediately, the way you recognize a voice before you can place the face. You're not in crisis. Nothing is visibly wrong, but something has changed. In you, quietly, without asking permission. And what you don't know yet, what nobody tells you, is that your brain has been preparing for this moment for years, building towards something, quietly dismantling something else. You have no map for this territory, and the feeling that woke you up tonight doesn't come with instructions. Most conversations about men at midlife get stuck on the surface, the sports car, the sudden interest in triathlons, the clichés that make it easy to dismiss what's actually happening as vanity or panic or weakness. But underneath all of that cultural noise, something genuinely significant is occurring inside the male brain around this age, and it has almost nothing to do with any of those things. It starts with testosterone. The popular version of this story is blunt: levels drop, men suffer. But the real story is more interesting than that. Testosterone doesn't just maintain muscle and drive. It plays a direct role in how dopamine, the brain's primary motivation and reward signal, moves through your system. As testosterone gradually declines through a man's 40s, the dopamine system recalibrates with it. By 45, most men are operating with roughly the hormonal profile of a younger version of themselves who hasn't slept properly in 3 days. Except this isn't exhaustion, and sleep won't fix it. And what this means in practical terms is that the things that used to feel immediately satisfying start requiring more effort to produce the same response. Think of it like a volume dial that used to go to 10. Now it tops out at 7. The music is still playing. It just doesn't hit the same way. This isn't depression. It's recalibration. The brain is quietly updating something fundamental, dropping old reward loops that have stopped serving you, making room for new ones it hasn't finished building yet. The problem is that the gap between those two states, where the old motivations have faded and the new ones haven't arrived, feels like emptiness, and most men have no framework to understand why they're standing in it, so they assume something is wrong with them. Usually nothing is. But that assumption alone can cost years. Here's something that almost never comes up in these conversations. The prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for long-term thinking, emotional regulation, and the ability to hold contradictory ideas without flinching, continues developing well into a person's mid-40s. Not the way it develops in adolescence, dramatically and visibly, more quietly, more slowly. But researchers who study adult brain development have found something unexpected in this late maturation. Around 45, a man's capacity for emotional nuance doesn't decline. It increases. You become more aware of consequences you used to move past without looking. More attuned to the emotional weight inside a decision. More capable of sitting with two true things at once without needing to resolve them into something simpler and cleaner. Your brain stops needing answers to be neat. It gets comfortable with messy and true at the same time. Some researchers call this post-formal thinking. You might just call it getting older in the right direction. The difficulty is that most men experience this growing capacity not as growth, but as disruption, because nobody told them it was coming. Nobody said, somewhere around 45, you're going to start feeling more. So when old grief resurfaces unexpectedly, when a relationship that seemed fine starts feeling genuinely insufficient, when work that used to define you starts feeling like a costume you've been wearing a long time, the instinct is to treat all of it as malfunction. Nothing is broken. Something is waking up. But if the brain is genuinely becoming more emotionally capable at 45, why does it feel, for so many men, like the opposite of that? There's a man sitting across a table from his oldest friend, halfway through a sentence about something ordinary, when a memory from 20 years ago surfaces so clearly he loses the thread of what he was saying. He can't explain it. He doesn't try to. That's where the answer starts. Not with the forgetting that signals something serious. That's a different conversation. This is subtler and stranger. Around the same time, the dopamine system is recalibrating and the prefrontal cortex is finishing its long maturation. Certain old memories begin surfacing without invitation. A summer from your late 20s. A conversation with your father you thought you'd long since filed away. A moment of failure or shame, or genuine joy. Something that hasn't crossed your mind in 15 years, rising up with an almost uncomfortable clarity. This isn't random. The hippocampus, which handles memory consolidation, appears to shift its priorities during periods of significant hormonal and neurological change. Researchers describe it as something close to an autobiographical audit, the brain pulling up old footage not to torture you, but to make sense of the continuity between who you were and who you're in the process of becoming. It's less like sorting through boxes and more like finding an old voicemail you never deleted, one you're finally ready to actually listen to. What you find in that message isn't a list of vague possibilities. It's specific. It might be the exact weight of your father's silence on a particular afternoon, the particular quality of light in a room where something ended. The brain isn't malfunctioning when it keeps returning to the past. It's doing something deliberate. It's trying to close loops it left open. And this is where the real difficulty begins. The brain doesn't just store information, it stores a self. For most men, a significant part of that self was assembled in their 20s and early 30s around structures that felt permanent: career, status, a particular version of strength, a way of moving through the world that required minimal examination. The brain encoded these things as identity, not just what you do, but who you are at a level that didn't seem open to revision. At 45, the prefrontal cortex, now more developed, more emotionally literate than it has ever been, begins auditing those structures in a way it genuinely couldn't before. It starts noticing the distance between the life being performed and the self underneath the performance. The ambitions that were inherited rather than chosen. The version of strength that was built to meet other people's expectations, not your own. This is the actual source of what the culture packages as a midlife crisis, not a breakdown. A cognitive and emotional audit conducted by a brain that has finally developed the capacity to run it and found some significant discrepancies in the books. Men who have words for this process tend to move through it. They come out the other side quieter, more solid, more themselves than they've been in decades. But they usually weren't smarter or stronger or more disciplined than the men who didn't. They just happened to have language for what was happening inside them. That was the whole difference. Men without that language tend to reach for external change to resolve an internal conflict the vocabulary isn't there to name. The brain registers a profound need for something to be different. The only tools available are visible, physical, outside the body. So the change goes outward. The sports car isn't vanity. It's a sentence someone didn't know how to say another way. But language alone isn't enough, because there's one more thing the brain does at 45 that almost no one talks about, and it's the part that changes what comes next. Here's the part that almost never makes it into the conversation. Emotional intelligence rises meaningfully in a man's mid-40s, not as a vague side effect of experience, structurally, measurably. The capacity for empathy sharpens. The ability to read what someone actually needs versus what they're saying becomes more precise. The hair-trigger defensiveness that characterized your 30s, the need to win the argument even when winning costs something real, starts feeling like a bad trade you're no longer willing to make. The brain also becomes more efficient at filtering signal from noise. The low-grade social anxiety that followed you through your 20s. The persistent, draining question of how you were being perceived, whether you were enough, whether the room approved, begins to quiet. Not because you've stopped caring about people, Because the brain has accumulated enough data about itself to feel, for the first time, genuinely settled in its own judgments. It stops needing external confirmation for things it's already decided internally. Researchers describe another shift happening in parallel, a growing capacity to see situations from multiple vantage points at once, without collapsing that complexity into something simpler than it actually is. This is part of what makes the counsel of older men useful in ways that raw intelligence alone can't replicate. It isn't just accumulated experience. It's a structural change in how the brain processes what it sees. At 45, you are likely the most emotionally intelligent you have ever been. And for the first time, you may be capable of knowing that without needing anyone else to say it first. But there's a shadow to all of this, and it deserves to be said plainly. Many men arrive at 45 having spent decades becoming exceptionally skilled at one specific thing, not looking inward. The brain rewires toward introspection. The emotional capacity expands. The autobiographical audit begins pulling up material that needs to be examined. And the man it's happening to has no habit of going inward, no trusted space to process what he's finding, and decades of conditioning that framed emotional examination as something close to failure. So the process that was designed to open something closes instead. The memories that surface get pushed back down. The identity questions get managed with distraction, with work, with noise. The growing emotional capacity has nowhere to go and turns inward in the wrong direction, becomes irritability, withdrawal, a relentless, low-frequency dissatisfaction that neither the man nor the people around him can quite locate or name. This isn't weakness. It isn't a character failure. It's what happens when a biological and neurological process runs without any of the support it requires. The brain at 45 is genuinely ready for a depth that the culture around it has spent decades making inaccessible. That gap between what the brain is reaching for and what the man has been given permission to do is where the real damage accumulates. So you're still standing there. Kitchen at 11 p.m., glass of water in your hand, and now you know something about that moment that you didn't before. The brain doing this to you tonight isn't malfunctioning. It isn't warning you that something has gone wrong. It's doing exactly what a brain does when it has finally developed the capacity to ask questions it's been carrying for 20 years. The dopamine system is recalibrating. The prefrontal cortex has finished something it started a long time ago. The hippocampus is pulling up old material because the filing system finally has enough room and enough perspective to go through it properly. That version of you who hit all the targets, carried everything quietly, performed the role without complaint. He isn't being discarded. He's being seen clearly, maybe for the first time. And what's looking at him is a brain that is more capable of honesty, more capable of depth, more capable of genuine connection than it has ever been. This is not a crisis. It is a reckoning. And the man who stands in it, who doesn't run from the audit, who finds even imperfect words for what's happening, that man doesn't end up smaller on the other side. He ends up more real. The question that's been running through your head tonight, the one that woke something up in you at 11 p.m. in a quiet house, it isn't a threat. It's the first honest question your brain has finally been equipped to ask. The only thing left is whether you're willing to let yourself answer it.